Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to the next webinar in our Spotlight series. We're so glad to have you here with us this afternoon, so let's dive right in. My name is Michael Bobbitt, and I'm the Executive Director of Mass Cultural Council. We are your independent state arts agency, and we are charged with bolstering the Commonwealth's creative and cultural sector. I'm so excited to welcome you to today's Spotlight series. This is a new webinar series we've launched this year to curate information and build awareness about opportunities and resources that may be of interest to the creative and cultural sector. For anyone who had planned to join us in November for our session with Mass Growth Capital Corporation, please again accept our apologies for the last minute cancellation. We hope to be able to find a new date for a webinar with them in the new year. But today we're really excited to have you here today, as we've got the team from Open Door Arts with us to give an overview of their new arts and culture accessibility self-awareness tool. This is a fantastic resource that Mass Cultural Council has been proud to support, and I've encouraged everyone to check them out. And I continue to encourage everyone. Before I turn it over to Nicole and Portia from Open Door Arts, I want to share a few housekeeping notes. As you may know, this webinar series is something new we've launched this year, and we'd like to make sure that this, as with all of our programs and services that we offer, is helpful to you all. Shortly after this webinar concludes today, you'll receive via email a link to a survey we'll ask you to complete to provide feedback on the webinar series so we can ensure that it's meeting the needs of the sector. More information will be in that email, but please be on the lookout for it. And a few other notes. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel in the coming days. Auto-generated captions are turned on and active for anyone who would like to utilize that service. You'll find the button to turn that on at the bottom of your screen. Finally, we ask that if you have any questions throughout the course of this webinar, please use the Q&A feature rather than the chat. We find that things can often get lost in there if they're in the chat. And so the Q&A feature will help us to try and get to all your questions. Now, I'd like to turn things over to Mass Cultural Council's own Program Officer for Access and Inclusion, Charles Baldwin, to introduce today's session. Charles.
Hello, and thank you, Michael. For folks on the call, my name is Charles Baldwin. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Access and Inclusion Program Officer here at the Mass Cultural Council. I have had the pleasure and privilege to be working with Open Door Arts for many years, based on their work in the community, both in arts and disability justice, and of course, was part of the surveying of the sector, which has contributed to 2 reports, which people should take a look at, Towards a Culture of Access, Parts 1 and 2, Institutional Knowledge, Individual Knowledge, and that has really been a key player in the Council's development of our own Deaf and Disability Equity Plan. And within all of that work has come an opportunity for Open Door Arts to develop a tool that will really help our sector and our grantee constituents. And that is really what this is about. What are the tools to help steward a broader understanding as well as a more intentional, accessible effort? So without further ado, I am going to introduce Nicole Legois of Open Door Arts, who will be leading this presentation while I monitor the chat and the Q&A. Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Charles and Michael, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Nicole Legois. I will introduce myself in a minute. But first, I just wanted to say thank you to the Mass Cultural Council and to Charles and Michael in particular, not only for the opportunity to share this work with you all today, but also for their incredible support and partnership in the process of creating this tool and all of the work that led up to it, all of the research that Charles just talked about, and also the work that we were able to do together to put forth a Deaf and Disability Equity Plan for the Mass Cultural Council, which is incredibly exciting. So thank you, and it's exciting to be with you all today. I'm going to share my screen and share a presentation. And all right. So on the slide, you will see the Arts and Culture Accessibility Self-Assessment logo, which is a project of Open Door Arts, and also the website for the self-assessment, which is www.artsaccessresources.org. And Charles will put that link in the chat as well. And there are some images that are black and white photos of patrons interacting with all kinds of arts and culture organizations. So quick introductions. If Open Door Arts is new to you, we are an affiliate of Seven Hills Foundation, and we're a Massachusetts-based arts and culture organization that works really uniquely at the intersection of disability, arts, and education. And our mission is to promote access, representation, and participation of people with disabilities in our arts and cultural community. We have been doing this work for 44 years now, and again, really excited about all of the work that we've done in partnership with the council. A little bit about myself. My name is Nicole Lagois. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the managing director of Open Door Arts. I am pictured on the slide. It's a black and white photo of me. I am a Latina woman in my 40s, and I have shoulder length brown hair, and I am pictured here in front of some artwork. I am the managing director of Open Door Arts, and I've been with the organization for 20 years, really centering our work in the sector and promoting accessibility through education programs, through our gallery, which is called the Open Door Gallery in the Worcester Art Museum, and through programs where we support cultural organizations to become more accessible, such as the tool that I'm sharing today. I also want to give a very special shout out to my colleague, Portia Brown, who unfortunately wasn't able to join today, but who really led this effort to create the tool. And also to Hannah Goodwin, who was a cultural access specialist with Open Door Arts as we were going through the process of creating this tool. So incredible gratitude to the two of them. And also to all the wonderful people who are pictured here on this slide. There are 12 black and white headshots of the amazing advisors and consultants that came together to inform all stages of the design of the self-assessment. I will tell you a little bit more about how they participated in a minute. But again, I wanted to just acknowledge the fact that I am speaking on behalf of a very large team of contributors. So with that, I'm going to talk to you about why we created the tool, the process that we use, a little bit more about what the tool is, and then I'm going to do a screen share and I'm going to walk you through, give you a little bit of a tour so that you get to see what the tool looks like and some of the supplemental materials that we created to support organizations to use it. So we're going to start with why. Why did we create this tool? And Charles talked a little bit about our research earlier. So for the past 3 years or so, we have been working in partnership with the Mass Cultural Council to conduct some research that kind of with the aim of better understanding what is the state of accessibility in the arts and culture sector in Massachusetts. And so we conducted 2 primary studies. One was focused on responses from arts and culture organizations, and the other on responses from the disability community. And we published the results of those studies in a 2-part report called Towards a Culture of Access. So part 1 is focused on organizations, and part 2 is focused on people with disabilities. And part 2 is actually focused on people with disabilities, some of whom are also artists with disabilities, as well as caregivers of people with disabilities. So really getting the perspective from both the organizations and the people, and to see where they align and where they don't, so that we can better have a more comprehensive understanding of the sector. Charles is putting the link in the chat so that you can take a look, and both reports are available in that link, as well as screen reader friendly versions of those reports. So through these studies, we wanted to find out, again, what is currently happening in terms of accessibility in this sector, what's working well, what needs improvement, and also, and really kind of importantly, what is going to help the work move forward. So what are some resources, some supports, some tools that we can create to support the sector at scale, to make sure that we are holding ourselves and each other accountable to this work. So here are some of the things that we learned from that research. And we learned a lot of things from the research, and we really hope that you read the reports, but here are some key takeaways. One was that organizations vary greatly in terms of how they assess their accessibility, but also in terms of how they understand and they actualize it. And that variability creates a lot of fatigue, a lot of distrust and harm for people with disabilities. So there's a lot of kind of trying to guess how accessible your experience is going to be across different organizations. And in fact, when we ask people with disabilities, how easy is it to request accommodations or to basically have your access needs met when you visit organizations, only 6% of people with disabilities said that it was easy. So at the same time, though, we asked if they would be more likely to visit cultural organizations if they were more accessible, and 72% said yes. So we know that that there would be a lot more engagement if organizations were doing the work that they need to do. And we were also hearing that organizations want to do the work. They want to be more accessible. They really believe in this and they are committed to this work, and that they feel really overwhelmed, that they don't know where to start, that they are unclear about how accessible they are right now. What are the things that are going to help them move that work forward? So all of this information really helped us start to prioritize the creation of a process and of a tool that would help organizations better understand where they currently are in this work, to be able to ask themselves questions that maybe they hadn't asked themselves before, or to have more clarity around which questions to ask themselves, and also to begin to understand and to plan a path forward so that they could improve. So with that, I'll tell you a little bit more about how we created the tool and the process. We've been thinking about this and kind of just understanding that this would be important, and the research was showing us that this would be important for a while. But it took us about 2 years from that initial imagination to the time when we were able to publicly release it. We wanted to make sure that the entire development process, the creation process of the tool, was disability centered. And what we did, and I showed some images earlier, is that we gathered a team of consultants, of paid consultants, who have both professional expertise, both in terms of disability law, and also the arts and culture sector, like how this applies to the arts and culture sector. And they brought their lived experience with disability as well. So of a team of 14 consultants, 10 identify as disabled, and they brought a wide variety of disability experiences so that we could really have all these different experiences inform the design and the development of the tool. The other thing is that they represented different types of organizations, and we thought that was really important from the beginning, because we wanted to make sure that a number of different types of organizations were able to access and benefit from this tool. The advisors were with us from the very, very beginning. We had advisors and consultants support us all the way from the imagination process to starting to think about what the structure might look like, identify the content sections, create the content, the writing the questions, designing supplemental tools, so really vetting host platforms, etc. And then within those advisors, we had an access team of 6 access consultants that were also acting as user experts and really helping us test. So we had folks testing different tools with screen readers, with different screen readers to make sure that it was screen reader accessible. We also worked with ASL and deaf interpreters to help provide ASL interpretation for the videos that are embedded in the self-assessment. And so once the tool was designed and it was ready to go in final draft, we also wanted to make sure that we tested it internally before releasing it to the public. So we conducted a national pilot to, again, get a sense from real organizations and how the process of taking the self-assessment was like for them, so that we could get some feedback. We put out a kind of a national call for pilot organizations, and we had 127 applicants to that call, which was really incredible to see how much this tool was desired across the country. And from those 127, we selected 13 organizations from around the country that represented a number of different types of organizations. So we had theaters, we had a zoo, a historic site, music ensemble, etc. Really different types of organizations. As big as the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, as small as a small rural theater, and locations all over the country. And also, really importantly, we wanted to make sure that we piloted the tool with organizations that were in very different stages of their accessibility work. So we wanted to make sure that if you're an organization that is very established and has done this for a very long time, or if you're an organization that is just getting started, that this would still help you, at all of those different levels, so that it could help you take your work to the next level if you're already established, or it could help you get started in a way that was helpful. So with all of that feedback from the pilot, we made some revisions and we publicly launched the tool on July 31st of this year. So what is the self-assessment? The self-assessment is a tool, and I want to emphasize the word self-assessment. So nobody is assessing you, you are assessing yourself. There's a lot of elements that were very intentional that I'll walk you through, that we wanted to make sure that this was for organizations to assess their own practices as opposed to it being directed and being conducted by someone else. So really a reflection process. It was really designed specifically for arts and culture organizations. So we know that there's a lot of tools out there that are a little bit more broad, and sometimes arts and culture organizations kind of don't see themselves and the nuance of their work reflected in some of those tools. So we wanted to make sure this was really specifically created for all kinds of arts and culture organizations, again, of different sizes, different budget sizes, different types of organizations, different types of just different work, different art forms, and also that were applicable to organizations in different geographic locations. That also organizations that work in all kinds of different settings, and again, at all stages of their accessibility work. I've already said this, but the self-assessment is disability centered. So it's both informed by the needs and the desires of people with disabilities. Again, coming from that research and from our own 40-year experience working in the field, and created by experts who have lived and professional experience with disability. But also the content itself really focuses and incorporates disability history, disability culture, disability identity, and it balances humanity and best practice with legal compliance. So we didn't want to create a tool that was just a legal compliance tool. That's a floor, not the ceiling. We wanted to go way beyond that. But we also didn't want to focus on a tool that only focused on best practices, ignoring legal compliance. We understood the importance of both and the complexity of balancing them both. It is not hierarchical in which one is prioritized over the other, but they're both part of the content. We wanted to make sure it was really comprehensive. First of all, it is a fully digital tool. So I will show you what the platform looks like. It's a digital kind of survey type platform, and it's self-paced, meaning that you can take the self-assessment in parts. You can start, stop, take a break, come back to it, and pace it in whatever way is right for your organization. The self-assessment has 300 questions, just about, which might seem like a lot, but when you are thinking about the nuance of accessibility, we thought that all of those 300 questions were really important. And what we did is that we organized those 300 questions into 5 main sections. And the sections are organizational approach, which is more about the essentials of accessibility, everything around your mindsets, your policies, your employment practices, your relationships with the disability community, et cetera. So it's this foundational piece. The second section is space. So this is about the built environment, all of your spaces and how people get around those spaces. The third is access services, so services that you provide for folks to be able to engage with what you offer. The fourth is communication. So this is about how you communicate about disability and people with disabilities in the language that you use and in your communication practices. but also how you communicate what you offer and what accessibility services and programs and features you offer in ways that are accessible. And then lastly, the fifth section is programming, which is really focusing on all kinds of different types of programming that you offer, all the way from ongoing programs to one-time programs to events. So all different scope of programming. Once you take the self-assessment and you answer all of these questions, we provide you with a customized report, and that report essentially kind of reflects your responses back to you in a way that helps you to start to see where are you doing really well, what are areas that need improvement, and then it provides you some guidance around creating a plan for improvement. Also, we wanted to make sure that as much as this is a self-assessment process, that it was also a learning process. So just by answering the questions, there's a lot of learning. So just even asking yourself questions that maybe you weren't asking yourself about before is already a learning process. But we also recognized that we needed to create some additional tools and resources to kind of help folks along the way with new questions that came up and to kind of understand this a little bit more holistically. So we created some additional resources that are embedded in the self-assessment and kind of attached to the self-assessment. One of them is an accessibility glossary. So we realized that in the process of filling out the self-assessment, there may be terms that are unfamiliar or maybe not as familiar. So we created a glossary that has about 90 or so accessibility related terms. And it has definitions of those terms, very brief, succinct definitions of those terms, as well as links to additional resources. So as you're going through the self-assessment, if you bump into a term that you're not familiar with, the glossary will help you with that. We also created a separate tool. It's a short survey, which we call the 504/ADA requirements ID tool. And Charles is putting all these links in the chat. This tool is, again, a brief survey, 11 questions. They're yes or no questions. And it asks you a number of different questions about your organization, some characteristics of your organization, and based on the responses of your to those questions, it helps you understand which laws and which parts of those laws you are required to comply with, depending on the characteristics of your organization. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. But we feel like this was a really important place to start, because there was a lot, we were learning that a lot of organizations had questions about, I know I have to comply with the ADA, but do I comply with Title I? How many employees do I need to have? You know, a lot of those questions were not always understood by all organizations, and we wanted to make sure we were clear from the beginning about what those requirements are and how they apply to you. We also provide you with accessibility plan templates, and I'll show you those. This is for you to be able to take your learnings from the self-assessment and create an actionable plan for improvement. We also provide guides to kind of help you set up your team, set up your plan to be able to take the self-assessment. So we give you a lot of kind of ideas and resources around that. We have links to external resources that can help you also along the way to learn more. And then if you have questions, which we know a lot of us do throughout the process of completing the self-assessment, or as you get started or after you received your report, we conduct free monthly Q&A sessions that you can come, and I'll show you how to register for those. And we also offer one-on-one coaching. So again, if you have very specific organizational questions, or you want us to provide a little bit more targeted support, we can do one-on-one coaching as well. And kind of very importantly, the tool is free. We really, it was very important to us that there weren't any barriers for organizations to be able to access this tool. And we know that conducting a third-party audit is not accessible to a lot of organizations because of time or because of the cost. And so we wanted to make sure that, you know, this very important kind of foundational step was accessible to everybody. So it is free to use, and please share this with your friends and with your colleagues, and yeah, and you can get access to this, and all of the tools that I mentioned earlier are included within that as well. All right, so with that, I'm going to do a brief tour of the self-assessment, and I'm going to start with some of those supplemental materials. This is the glossary, and it is a Google Doc format. It could also be downloaded as a PDF. The glossary has, as I was mentioning, a number of terms that are defined here. So for example, 2010 standards for accessible design. And then you have a short description, 1 or 2 sentences of what it is, and then a link for further learning. So again, as you bump into that term in the self-assessment, it helps you understand what it is. If you have the outlines feature open here on the left side, it'll help you jump more easily from term to term. I will show you once we're in the self-assessment also how the glossary is linked, the individual terms are linked within the self-assessment. Next, this is the ADA/504 identification tool, the tool that helps you identify what laws and regulations you have to comply with depending on your organization. So again, it's a number of yes or no questions. So as an example, for example, here, this would apply probably to most of you in the room. This is, this asks you the question, is your organization a non-government organization that is open to the public? So let's say a museum, a theater. If you answer yes, you would answer yes here, etc. You answer all of those questions. There's questions about your funding, your facilities, etc. When you're done, you hit finish at the bottom. And what it will do is it'll trigger a little report. Any questions that you answered yes to will populate into that report. So going back to that question that I just read out loud, if you had said yes to this question, the report will tell you, you said yes to question 2, which means that you are a place of public accommodation, which means you have to comply with Title 3 of the ADA. Here is what that means, and we'll tell you a very succinct list of what that means in terms of your responsibilities, and we'll give you links to additional resources so that you better understand what your responsibilities are. All right, so with that, I'm going to now jump into the self-assessment itself. You would, again, go to www.artsaccessresources.org, and that brings you to this landing page. In this landing page, you will see 3 boxes. The one on the left is the link to the self-assessment. And then just very quickly wanted to show you, here is how you sign up for additional support. If you'd like to book a one-on-one support session, you can do that here. And if you want to attend one of our free Zoom Q&A sessions, we have one every month. So the one for January will populate soon. So when you're ready to start your self-assessment, you can click here on Get Access, and that brings you right into the tool itself. We host the self-assessment on a tool called Brilliant Assessments, and we chose it based on its accessibility and its features. So once you enter the self-assessment, the first thing you're going to see at the top is a self-assessment guide. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is and how much we recommend that you start by really reading it thoroughly, because it'll give you a lot of guidance in terms of how to prepare to take the self-assessment, how to prepare your team. It'll answer some frequent questions. So really, please start by reading the guide because it'll be very helpful. Once you've done that, you can enter an email address here. And the email address, what it will do is it'll send a link to your email with a unique link to the self-assessment that you can use to come in and out of your self-assessment so that you don't lose your progress. I also want to pause and be very clear. I mentioned earlier, this is a self-assessment, not an assessment. Nobody is assessing you. So this is for you. There is no place in the self-assessment where we will ask you to enter your organization's name. Nobody is going to be able to associate your responses with your organization's name. Again, this is for you, for your own learning, and for your own growth. The email address that you enter here, again, is so that you can get that unique link. You could use a personal email address if you wish. You could create a new email address. So you can use any email address. Just make sure you remember which email address you use as you move forward. So once you entered your email address, it'll take you straight into the introduction, just a little bit of a context as you get started. I want to point out a few features. At the top of the self-assessment, you'll see a bar which will tell you what section you're in. So here we're in the introduction. There's a progress bar so that you know kind of how far along you are in your process. And there is a save progress button on the upper right-hand corner. The tool will save your progress automatically, but if you are coming in and out of the tool, it's probably a good idea to hit that button. Then you will see some written text with introductions and some context, and all of that will also be summarized in a PDF. So if you want to, you can read it on the website. You could also download a PDF if you want to share that with colleagues, you want to print things out, you can do that as well. And then there'll be, again, that written introduction, as well as that same introduction provided in a spoken video with ASL and with captions. All of those videos, except for the first one that you're looking at, which is with me, are all, the videos are all led by disabled artists and cultural workers. So with the introduction, we're going to jump right into the actual content. So this is where we're getting into those 5 main sections of the self-assessment. And the first section, as I mentioned earlier, is organizational approach. So again, you have that introduction, you have a PDF. So now that we're in the main sections, you're also going to see, you'll see an overview, which will tell you a little bit more about what this section is about, what are some of the things that we're going to be asking you here, and then a section that's called resources and links for this section. So here's where we're going to share some external resources that might be helpful as you complete this section. Some of it legal requirements, some of it some additional helpful resources. We have our video with the lovely Karen, and then we get started with the questions. So this is where the fun happens. So again, organizational approach is that first section, and then each of the 5 sections are broken up into multiple subsections to kind of help group the questions. The first one, for example, is values, beliefs, and mindsets. So then you get into the actual questions and the response choices. So there are 6 response choices for each of the questions, and they're consistent throughout the self-assessment. The response choices are fully true, mostly true, somewhat true, not true. And then you have also the option of not sure or not applicable. And we just encourage you to really kind of push yourself to think about whether the question is actually not applicable, or whether maybe it's just something that you're not doing yet, and that's okay. And in that case, you would say not true. Not applicable is, for example, if we are asking you about the accessibility of your elevator and you don't have an elevator, then that's perfectly reasonable as a not applicable. But sometimes it may be that it doesn't apply yet because we're not doing it yet, in which case you might want to say not true. Not true yet. We're working on it. I also want to show you here, this is an example of how the glossary shows up on the self-assessment. So for question 2, you'll see the word intersectionality is in blue, and it is also a hyperlink. When you hover over, that means it's a glossary term. When you hover over it, you will see that a pop-up window shows up with that definition of the term, the definition that is in the glossary. If we know, and with testing also, we prove that the pop-up windows are not accessible for screen reader users. So you can also just click on the term and it takes you straight to the self-assessment. It takes you straight to where the term, that particular term is on the self-assessment. So you can access the definition in a number of different ways. With that, I'm also going to show you another feature. I'm going to scroll very quickly. Apologies for the quick scrolling. Now I'm in the subsection about employment. And I want to show you another feature, which is question 8 here reads, people with disabilities have equitable opportunities to participate, work for, and engage with our organization. And there's a little asterisk at the end. Any question that has an asterisk at the end implies that there is a legal requirement associated with that question. So for example, under Title I of the ADA, there are requirements around accessibility of employment for organizations that have 15 or more employees. So hopefully you will have taken the identification tool right now to see which laws apply to you or not. But here we're just telling you, by the way, there's a legal requirement, so pay attention to that. One thing that I'm very excited about is that we're not leading with the legal requirements. They are kind of sprinkled in. They're not in hierarchical order, like do these things first and then those things. But we do tell you when there is a legal requirement. I'm going to do some really quick scrolling to show you another feature at the bottom of the self-assessment. So for each of the 5 sections of the self-assessment, at the bottom of those sections, you will see a little text box section where you can write. So for example, as you're taking the self-assessment for the organizational approach section, maybe some questions come up for you. Maybe there's some notes that you want to share with your team. Maybe there's some things that you want to remember when you're creating your accessibility plan. Whatever it may be, anything you want to capture, you can type it in here. And then when you receive your report, I will show you all of that content is going to be saved so that you can have access to it. All right, with that, at the bottom, you will see a previous and a next button. So we're going to go next to go to the next section of the self-assessment, which is space. This is the section that covers, again, physical, the built environment, your physical spaces, the feature of those spaces. Space is a little bit more of a complex section just because there's so many requirements around it and there's so many different types of spaces. But we'll walk you through all of that. Again, you have the introduction. And for the space section, just because, again, there are so many legal requirements, we are including kind of a companion tool that we got permission to share from the New England ADA Center, which is called the ADA Checklist for Existing Facilities. And it is hyperlinked in the resources section of the space section. I will show you what that looks like. And what we're doing in this section is we're going to use it as a companion document to help you better understand what those legal requirements are for your built spaces. So again, we have the video, we get into the questions, and I'm going to show you very quickly. I'm going to scroll down quickly to question 11. Question 11, again, as I mentioned earlier, has that asterisk. So with the asterisk, we know that there is a legal requirement associated with this question. So the question is about the exterior routes to your entrances and whether they meet ADA requirements for dimensions, slope, curb ramps, and surface. So you may be asking yourself, what are those requirements? I don't know if they meet them because I don't know what the requirements are. So then down here at the end of a question, we're going to give you in parentheses a set of numbers. And those numbers correspond to the section in the ADA checklist for existing facilities that is corresponding to this question. So I'm going to show you very quickly. You see here we have 1.13 through 1.36 is covering some of this question. So when I go to the ADA checklist, this is what it looks like. It's a PDF. It's available in other formats as well. You can see that now we're in the exterior accessible routes section, and it starts from 1.13. And this is what's going to tell you, here are the ADA 2010 standards for accessible design relating to exterior routes, so that you understand what all of those standards are, and you can have measurements, you can have all of that information. So again, a really helpful companion as you're assessing your physical spaces. With that, I'm going to just scroll into the next sections of the self-assessment. The third section, as I mentioned earlier, is access services. Again, this is about the types of services that you provide, including ASL interpretation, captioning, assistive listening devices, etc. So that's the third section. I won't go into detail, but you know what kind of what it is. The fourth section, as I mentioned earlier, is communication. By now, you may have noticed that each of the sections has a different color to it, and I will show you why that will come in handy in a minute. So communication is in purple. And then the last section, the fifth section, is about programming. And I'll just share that the programming section is a little bit shorter, and the reason is because a lot of the considerations that you would think about when you're thinking about the accessibility of your programming, you've probably already thought about throughout the self-assessment in terms of your policies, your physical spaces, the services that you provide, how you communicate about them. So a lot of that has already been covered. So the programming section is a little bit more specific and condensed. So you've gone over the 5 sections. You are ready to submit this, and we're going to have a quick closing section that has some simple questions to ask you about your demographics. Again, we are not asking you about your organization's name. We're asking some kind of general demographic information to better understand the data that we're collecting. We're asking you first for your primary organization type, secondary organization type, if that applies to you. We'll ask you what the staff size of your organization is. and what your annual operating budget is, and then what state you're located in. This is a national tool, as I mentioned earlier. So we're getting an understanding of how the tool is being used across the country. And with that, we're asking you a question here. Do you agree to have your anonymous responses included in an aggregate data set? So again, all of the responses that will be collected from this, from the self-assessment, have provided us this incredible opportunity to have a very detailed, very robust data set to better understand how cultural organizations are doing in terms of their accessibility at a national level. And we can disaggregate that information by organization type, by location, by budget size, by staff size. So kind of just like we did with the Towards a Culture of Access reports, where that research really helped us to design interventions and tools and services, we're hoping that with this incredible amount of data that we're able to collect, we can share, again, aggregate data and start to really pull some trends, so that then with that information, we can start to really think about how do we continue supporting the sector at scale? How do we pool our resources with partners like the Mass Cultural Council, like other organizations that are doing amazing work in this area, so that we can really think about collective action and collective impact at a scale that we haven't before, which is super exciting. So with that, you'll get to the bottom of the self-assessment. You're done here. And we're asking you to please, please, please be sure that you are absolutely done, that you have answered all of the questions that you can answer, the ones that are applicable. And when you're done, you'll hit the finish button. Please make sure you don't hit the finish button until you're really finished, because once you finish it, you will not have access to it again, and it will trigger your report. So just make sure you're ready to hit finish before you do that. And what you will get, which is, I think I have, my apologies. I'm looking for a page that I think I may have closed by accident. So the self-assessment will trigger a report. I'm actually gonna stop sharing my screen really briefly so that I can find, I can get access to that report. If you just give me one quick second. Okay. Great, thank you for bearing with me. And I'm going to share my screen again. All right, so again, once you have submitted your self-assessment, it will automatically trigger the creation of this report. The report is going to show up on your screen. So you'll be able to download it from your screen in about like 30 seconds after you hit submit. And it will also be emailed to the email address that you use to complete the self-assessment. And so what it does essentially is that it will take the responses that you provided and it will score them for you, so that you can see through those scores kind of a big picture and get a better understanding of how you're doing with your accessibility. So I'm scrolling through the report. On the first page, you're going to get access to an overall score. So this is a score that really kind of captures all of the responses in one score. I want to emphasize that this is not a test. There's no 100. Nobody will ever get 100. You should not aspire to get 100. This is really just a reflection of what you said, right? But we know that one score doesn't really help much. So then we're going to break that further into scores for each of the 5 subsections. So here you start to get a better understanding of what are the areas, the 5 sections where we're doing better. What are the sections that maybe need a little bit more attention? And then we break it up even further. So we're going to take each of those 5 sections. So for example, organizational approach had a number of subsections, and we're going to provide even more detailed subsection scores. So here I'm showing the section detail for organizational approach, where you get to see which of those subsections maybe you scored higher and in which you scored lower. So for example, accountability here, I see that I have a 63% score versus finance and budgeting was higher. Grievance was lower. So here's where you start to get a sense of what you might need to prioritize. What are the areas that need more attention? And this is also where the color coding comes in to kind of help you be able to see those. So I'm going to scroll so you can see kind of what that looks like in different sections. If there is no score, it means that you said not applicable to all the questions, or that you skipped the questions. And so then the report takes us to what I think is the most important part of the whole process, which is the creation of your accessibility plan. An accessibility plan is, again, a document, an actionable plan that you create based on your assessment, your learning from your assessment, to help you put these actions into a plan to help you move forward. So we're going to give you kind of a description of what an accessibility plan is. We'll give you some steps and some ways to help you prioritize. How do you put this plan together? What do you prioritize? How do you create a timeline? And also, we created 2 accessibility plan templates that you can use, you can modify, you could create your own, but these are actual templates where you can start to really create your plan. And I'm going to show you one of them. There are 2, we created 2. One is in Google Sheets or Google or Excel format, which is the one I'm sharing on my screen right now. We also have one that is in Word or Google Docs format, so whatever format works best for you. So right now I'm showing you the Excel or Google Sheets version, and I'll walk you through it through an example. So first, we ask you what is the category. So what of the 5 sections this area is in. So for example, this one is an organizational approach. You have a drop-down menu. What is the item? What needs to be improved? So here we said hiring materials need to be improved. We have a section called description of issues. So what was the issue with your hiring materials? Our hiring materials are missing accessibility information. What is your plan for improvement? So we said what we need to do is to add salary, inclusion statement, and the description of essential job functions. What is your planned completion date? So you can add your date. Who or what team is responsible? Is there an approximate cost? So here's where you can get also started with budgeting and planning for that. Do you have a funding source, or do you need to identify a potential funding source for this? And also, what is the priority level? And we have low, medium, and high that you can choose from. And then you can get to also see where you are in your progress. So is this not started? Is it in progress, or is it completed? And you can take some notes. So again, the plan template is to help you to be able to create the plan and also hold yourself accountable. And all of these you can sort and filter so that you can see them based on the different categories. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come back to the group. And I know that Charles has been monitoring the Q&A, and we're going to see if you have some questions for me.
Thank you, Nicole. And for folks just coming in, yes, we've got about 10 minutes for Q&A. And I do have one in here. So I'm going to read this aloud. First, amazing resource. So that's a yay. Second, this might be a silly question. There are no silly questions. But I wonder if you have received feedback about the manner in which the self-assessment tool is completed, i.e., does one person answer all 300 questions alone, or is it done collaboratively? Great question.
Great question. So I will say we got a lot of feedback during the pilot, which was really helpful. And also we've been hearing from other organizations since then. And the very unhelpful answer is it varies. It varies a lot. It depends a lot on the organization. So we have had teams that will have, for example, their access coordinator or their access committee take a stab, and then they'll have conversations with the rest of their team once they have the report. Some organizations that have maybe more complex spaces, physical spaces, might involve their facilities teams. For example, if you're assessing specific program accessibility, you can involve your program staff. So usually what we recommend is have one kind of main point person who then determines who else needs to come in. And in the guide that I showed you at the very beginning, we give you a lot of really concrete advice and questions and considerations to think about so that you can better understand and identify what would apply best to your organization and your unique context. So the answer is there's many ways to do this and identify what works best for your team. You could also, as I said, take it in multiple parts. So you could say, hey, programming team, here is the email address that we're using. Go in there, do the programming questions. We'll come back in a month and we'll look at it together. So lots of flexibility in terms of what works best for you.
Yeah, this is Charles. I want to reiterate that because I've been working with a number of organizations and they really have had distinct approaches based on their capacity. I've had the access coordinator from large organizations just zip through it to provide a report to leadership. I've also had large organizations do a very thoughtful group process, as Nicole was just mentioning. So,
and Charles, really quickly, I remember one of our pilot organizations told us that for him, he needed to have the report in order to sit down with leadership so that leadership would pay attention to it, because then they had something tangible to look at. So if that's where your organization is, that's great, right? Sometimes the organization leaders are going to be involved in all steps. Sometimes they won't. And as staff who is really leading this, you need to have something concrete to show up with to your board or to your ED or to whoever is in charge to make those decisions.
To answer Sandra's question in the chat, what's the estimated length of time? Obviously,
yeah, again, very unhelpful answer, Sandra, but varies so much. So the average time that it took pilot organizations to take the self-assessment was 2.6 hours. So I guess 2 hours and 40 minutes or so. And that varies so much. So we were in conversation, for example, with a historic sites organization that has 38 facilities across multiple states. The process is going to look very different for them than it did for me when I did it for Open Door Arts, right? Like I took the self-assessment as well. It took me about 2 hours. I had the answers to a lot of questions. I don't have a physical facility that is mine. So it took a very different amount of time for me. So I would say it really varies, and it depends a lot on the number of programs, the number of facilities, the size and the scope of your facility, and a number of other factors. But again, you can take it in parts. You can stretch it over a period of time. Yeah,
and
a lot of variability there.
Because it's a reminder, this isn't competitive. This is really about providing a tool that will allow you and the organization to really think about where do you want to put some of your efforts, what might be working super well, what might be down the pike. This is a tool for you. Mass Cultural Council is not coming in and critiquing it. Nicole is not coming over to critique it. It really is for you. And so it might take a lot longer, but it also might be quick. I have an organization that I'm working with that did it like the day it was released and are looking, well, that's some of us. And I'm suggesting that in a year that they do it again, just to see if there has been impact. The second time, third time might be a little faster. So,
yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Charles. Also, in terms of that this is not a one and done type of tool or process. That this is a really great way to start looking at your progress. So again, you have that report. So if you take the self-assessment again in 2-3 years, or however often you want to do it, you get to see where things are evolving, which is really great. Also, if I never lead with this because I don't think it's the part that we should lead with, but if your organization receives federal funds or pass-through funds from the federal government, so if you get money from the Mass Cultural Council, which we all do, you have a requirement to have an accessibility plan on file, which means that this process, the process of completing the self-assessment and creating an accessibility plan, is actually helping you fulfill that federal requirement.
Any other questions in the last 4 minutes of your lunch break? Really appreciate that everyone is here today, and I know that it can seem like a lot, which is why we're really encouraging you to take a look at it. That first look may have probably the most weight, because once you get into it, it really is trying to steward actionable items. And as I said, it's not a competition, it's not being graded. It really is for you to, again, continued improvements. It's such a big piece of what the Mass Cultural Council and our own Deaf and Disability Equity Plan is really trying to steward, that constant sense of improvement.
Great. And Charles, I just wanted to share that I put our email address in the chat. Thanks, Sandra, for asking. So admin@opendoorartsma.org is the best way to reach with specific questions. And also if you go to artsaccessresources.org, which is the main page of the website of the self-assessment, you can, again, sign up for one-on-one or come to one of our Q&A sessions.
And I just posted sort of all the links that we shared, including the Mass Cultural Council's YouTube channel, where this video will get published in a few days. And delighted that, again, Nicole, that we've had the opportunity to share this marvelous tool with the audience today. And Michael, you're back.
This is incredible. I hope you will all use this free tool. It's designed for you. And so and stay tuned for more opportunities like this from Mass Cultural Council. But we're really sad to see this ending because I'm sure there are a million more questions. I want to again thank Nicole and everyone at Open Door Arts for being with us today and creating such an incredible tool for us all to use. I hope you will all join us for future Spotlight series, Spread the Word. I also want to thank Charles Baldwin for moderating and being part of this presentation. We always appreciate when you can join us and share your expertise, and Christian in the background making all the magic happen. As a reminder, as Charles just mentioned, this recording will be posted on our YouTube channel in the coming days. And please be on the lookout for the survey to hit your inboxes shortly. We'd really appreciate your feedback. Thanks all for coming and have a great holiday season. Take care, everyone.